Before the Three Doctors, there was Deathworld. July sees Big Finish's adaptation of what could have been the very first multi-Doctor story to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the show. In this video, I'll be covering the history of Deathworld. The fan-generated concept of a multi-Doctor adventure first came up soon after the arrival of Jon Pertwee's Doctor in January 1970. Being science fiction's Doctor Who was perhaps the only series in which a team-up between all the actors who have played the lead was really feasible, and in particular, that appealed to Dix and Letts because they always wanted a strong New Year gimmick to launch each fresh season of Doctor Who. In 1970, we saw Jon Pertwee crash down to Earth to start his exile. For 1971, they created a new arch-enemy, the Master. Then they brought back the Daleks in 1972. And earlier the same year, they were already thinking ahead to the show's 10th anniversary season for 1973. Tentative approaches were made to Pertwee's predecessors, with Patrick Troughton indicating that he'd be delighted to resume the second Doctor role, and William Hartnell, now effectively retired through ill health, sounding similarly enthused about recreating the original Doctor. What the BBC production office didn't realise is that they caught Hartnell on one of his more lucid days. Terrance Dicks rang Bob Baker and Dave Martin to see if they would be interested to write a serial which involved all the Doctors. They accepted gladly. Baker and his writing partner Dave Martin had already developed two Doctor Who serials for Terrance Dicks, The Claws of Axos and The Mutants, both crammed with excessive ideas and concepts into large-scale narratives. Now the highly imaginative Baker and Martin had to come up with a way of getting the third Doctor out of his unit lab in order to escape his earthbound exile imposed by the Time Lords. On Thursday, the 3rd of February 1972, shortly before their new serial The Mutants went into production, they submitted their Three Doctors proposal, with a covering note that read, "As you know, we're not very good at storylines, but here is an idea we had on our last trip on the train." Then came the pitch. Assuming the Three Doctors, we thought it would be logical that the only place they could meet would be somewhere out of time. Somewhere out of time we have assumed to be some kind of underworld, Hades, i.e. the afterworld, the world of death. As such, their proposed narrative was boldly entitled Deathworld. The pitch continued with an outline of episode 1, opening with a pronounced echo of Ingmar Bergman's classic 1957 film The Seventh Seal. Starts with a game of chess. The cowled figure of death, with his chalk-white face and skeletal hands, is playing the High King, or President of the Time Lords. The High King, however, is playing with what Baker and Martin pointedly referred to as the Three White Kings. As the first of the White Kings is taken, Death's bony fingers close around and capture the piece, and it is scribbled in the footnote the writers rationalised this is a deviation from the normal chess match, in which the king cannot be taken. In this game, Death takes the king. Not sporting, but that's death. The king's capture causes an accident in the Doctor's lab. Following the mishap, there is no sign of the Doctor or Joe, and it is assumed that their bodies were vaporized in the accident. In fact, they find themselves in a limbo, an eerie, ethereal, empty sort of place. By the end of the first installment, Death has disposed of the two other White Kings, Doctor Who Hartnell and Doctor Who Troughton, and they too have arrived in limbo. Meanwhile, Doctor Who Pertwee and Joe have already arrived and been menaced and scared by one of Death's manifestations of himself. The proposal then outlined 5 areas of the story's development. The first notion put forward was that the Doctors have been allowed to enter the underworld as a glorified initiation test. They're guinea pigs in a struggle for power, represented on one side by the Time Lords and the other side by the forces of evil. A federation including Death, War, and the Seven Sins of various devils and fates, such as the Gorgons, who are plotting to overthrow the dominance of the Time Lords. The Time Lords believe that the gambling of one, or rather 3, of their own kind is better than facing an all-out interstellar war and its consequent horrors on the ordinary, lesser, eternal people of the universe. The second concept was the Doctors don't know why they're in limbo, and that finding out is one of the tests they have to undergo. These challenges confront them with such figures as the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, zombies, demons, and hobgoblins, all of whom the Doctor realises are manifestations of death. The third point the writers went on was the escape from the underworld is only accomplished through the combined efforts of all 3 incarnations. Even so, they added Dr. Hartnell and Dr. Troughton sacrifice themselves so that the Doctor and Joe escape. Thus we have the 2 older Doctors appearing briefly in episodes 1, 2, and 3, but figuring more largely in episode 4. In the 4th strand, Baker and Martin noted that the interaction between the Doctors could provide a comic element to counterpart the battle against the forces of evil. Furthermore, all the manifestations of death need not be terrifying, drawing on Greek myths. They cited the giant Polyphemus, which could be rather blundering and stupid. In addition, the 7 deadly sins could also be used for comedic effect, just as it had been since the medieval times, right up for the comedy sketch movie The Magnificent 7 Deadly Sins, released the year before. Finally, the story as a whole would have elements in common with the 1969 serial The War Game, through the use of the baddies in different zones and cultures, such as the sinister mastermind of death who would manifest as mythological figures like the Hindu goddess Kali and the Japanese spirit of a spider woman.
The giant spider got you in the end.
And the spider got me in the end.
We put this idea up in this form, rather sketchy at the moment, to hear your reaction to the general concept of Deathworld. They concluded our ideas on set are still vague, some sort of misty limbo, the caves of hell, a kind of haunted castle, not much filming. There was a lot here that Terrance Dicks liked, notably the brooding, enigmatic figure of evil that pervaded the story. But there was no way this figure could be death, or indeed that such vivid depictions of evil and limbo could be represented to a family audience within the show's budget and remit. First, Death would become the figure of Ohm. Ohm, when rotated, reads Who, indicating the lead character's exact opposite. Then Omega, the final entry in the Greek alphabet. The battle between an evil force and an all-powerful Time Lord was in. Limbo was out, replaced by the world of antimatter. Certainly the first 2 Doctors couldn't sacrifice themselves, since the theory this would eliminate the possibility of the 3rd Doctor having ever existed, but certainly there could be elements of mystery as the different incarnations puzzle over the trap in which they're being drawn into, albeit the bad guy being one of their own race. Another concern was the general tone. The writers were still ramming various forces of evil into their episode 1 draft of the script. Some 3 months later, promoting Dicks to explain them that Doctor Who wasn't prepared to accommodate mass suicides, corpse-filled morgues, lumbering ghastly zombies, and man-eating fungus. For want of a better name, The 3 Doctors was adopted as a temporary working title for the 4-part serial when it was commissioned by Dicks on Tuesday the 27th of June. Having read an article on black holes in the 16th of July's edition of the Sunday Times, Death Traps in Space, by Brian Silcock, Baker and Martin established Omega's antimatter world beyond the event horizon of such a super dense mass, not even allowing light to escape its grip. This also gave the adventure the new title, The Black Hole. Scheduled around the availability of Patrick Troughton, The Black Hole entered production in November 1972. But by then, Dicks had been forced to amend Baker and Martin's script to reduce William Hartnell's involvement. It turned out to be the final performance of William Hartnell's long career. By the end of the month, when the studio recording began, everyone had agreed the celebratory adventure needed a different title. A title that would make it clear that the serial encapsulates a whole decade of Doctor Who. A title that would proclaim a unique selling point loud and clear. So, The 3 Doctors was born.